Dynamic voices for a diverse church. This is Pass the Mic.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Pass the Mic. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Jemar Tisby, and we are joined by our producer extraordinaire. I always want to say award-winning because that he is our award-winning producer, Beau York.
Man, Jemar Tisby, the man, the myth, the legend, the doctor, the two-time best time New York.
As a matter of fact, I was looking forward to not going there.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
But you have the spirit of justice coming
we're just
out.
Two dudes,
like you've
talking.
got, yeah, but like I feel like the people
me
need
off
to know.
of the pedestal.
They need to know, man. Spirit of justice. When's it coming out?
Thank you. September 3rd, available for pre-order right now wherever you get your books.
That's great. And will you actually sign it for me? Can I get a sign?
You always conveniently forget the book, even though we're in your hometown, your current resident town, and whatever. I don't take it personally anymore. It's been too long.
No, it's fine. It's fine. The wild thing is, I was thinking about this the other day, but all these amazing authors that have like occurred in the last 10 years that I've had the pleasure of working with. And I've got all these, I've bought all your books. I personally bought them because y'all wouldn't give me a copy. I'm just kidding. There's been a lot. I generally buy one and I'm gifted a copy, but I always forget to get them signed. That's on me.
I think it's okay. I don't know what, I have books that are signed and like, it's cool, but okay.
How else am I going to put them on eBay and like upcharge?
There it is. Here we go. Well, I don't even want to talk about books today. I want to talk about movies.
But we're talking about a movie about an author.
This is true. So one of the things folks maybe don't realize is when we record, we typically batch our recordings on a podcast retreat, do it all together. But one of the highlights of getting together is movie night. It's almost always the first night we're here, and we spend forever picking the movie. I think our first movie night was Prey, the movie Prey.
Oh yeah. Not Eat, Pray, Love. That was a different. We never actually.
That was
not our first one. Our first one we did was the John Wick. Y'all introduced me to John Wick.
Yes. How could I forget? Yeah, one of the classics. And then I think one of the memorable ones was Prey. That was the Predator prequel.
And we've done it in theaters too. We did Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and unfortunately, we did Captain Marvel, the first one when that came out.
Whoa, good memory. Yeah, I blocked some of that out. But then this year, Ryan, our videographer, picked the film American Fiction. Now, this film came out in 2023, was Oscar nominated, had all the awards buzz. I had not yet watched it, and it's only been a year, so I don't feel that out of the loop. And I gotta say, in general, it lived up to the hype. I thought the writing was excellent.
Yeah. No, it was fantastic. Very well cast too.
Yes.
Fantastic cast,
Jeffrey
fantastic
Wright.
writing. Jeffrey Wright. This is the problem with Jeffrey Wright, though. This man is too talented because not only is he incredible on screen, but like his voice acting chops are incredible.
Oh, yes.
Like there's one moment in particular I remember very specifically in the movie where he's got his back to the camera and the AV was just a little off, so he just had the same levels all the way throughout. I was like, oh, he's about to narrate the entire movie.
His voice is that good.
Yeah.
It's that compelling. Well, this is sort of a meta critique of the publishing industry and more broadly, like what white readers respond to.
White liberal readers.
That's an important distinction that we're going to talk about here. And so if you haven't seen the movie, no spoilers, but basically the plot is Jeffrey C. Wright's character is an author. He hasn't published in a while. He's really frustrated. People don't like good writing, good literature anymore. And there's this book out by a Black woman author named Issa Rae. The actor is Issa Rae. And it's sort of like plays to all the typical tropes about like inner city Black trauma and all of that. It's trauma porn, right?
Sure.
But it's top of the charts, gets all the attention, whatever. So in a fit of frustration, Jeffrey C. Wright's character writes a book like that. And against all of his like literary tastes and his inclinations, it becomes a hit as well. And so we tumble down this rabbit hole and this snowball of increasing popularity of this book that he hates and wrote as like a critique on people's tastes. But people love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you think of the film in general?
Oh, broadly speaking, fantastic. I mean, I think it's got a very important message that I think falls on a lot of deaf ears, especially given the fact that it was an Academy nominated film.
Yeah. That's kind of ironic.
Yeah.
It was, the critique was popular. the critique of what's popular is popular.
Yeah. And I think it's layered and nuanced, which I really appreciated. Because there's a great confrontation. Like you think about like the climax of the movie, kind of two climaxes of the movie. I'm not going to spoil it, but you know, there's the funny one at the end where they kind of give you a couple of multiple choice to how the movie could end. But the real climax is really him confronting this other author that you mentioned earlier, whose book has gone super popular. And yet she's also calling out his book, not knowing that he's the one that wrote it. And he's like, I was parodying you. Like you were literally the inspiration for this book. Why are these two things different? And it was a very layered conversation they had.
It was. I felt kind of unresolved in that conversation.
I think intentionally so.
Yeah. Who's right? You know, kind of a thing. Who's
the white lady walked in like, all right, what are we talking about?
Okay, yes. Okay. So that's the part I want to focus on is so it's like I mentioned before, the trauma porn where you're sort of putting the plight of Black people on display for white audiences. And in the movie, the character's dilemma is this tension of, well, yes, that's a reality for Black people, but that's not all of our reality. But the only reality that tends to get the attention is this tragic suffering story, right?
Yeah.
So then, you know, I'm having all of these like existential questions as an author.
See,
like,
that's the thing. I'm actually very curious to, like, from your perspective, as you're watching this movie,
Here we go.
as you're seeing, you know, Jeffrey Wright portraying the Jemar Tisby story. Well, it is different, though. Of course, you are an author who writes you write nonfiction, whereas he's specifically a fiction author. But I am curious, given the fact that this is so drenched into the challenges in the publishing industry, where was your head at during watching this movie?
Publishing is a business, bottom line. And that is so hard for authors of any sort, because even if you're writing nonfiction, it's fundamentally a creative work. And so we get into all this artsy stuff where we do the work for the value of the work and for what it contributes to the field. But whatever you're passionate about or whatever approach you're taking to art isn't always popular in the market. And there's this tension of, well, do I get some work published and platformed, and maybe that leads to other work that I really love and believe in? Or do I stick to my guns and work in obscurity and poverty, by the way, to stay true to the art form? And there are plenty of authors who do both. I sometimes you get fortunate, like I think I did. So with The Color of Compromise, I was writing about stuff I was really passionate about. I was in the midst of grad school. I was absorbing all this information. Part of me just needed an outlet to write it. And it just happened to come, I wouldn't even say at a moment, because it took 1.5 years for it to hit the bestseller list. But when it did come out, I think it still was a necessary addition to a conversation about racial justice. And the addition was, what is the role the church played in it? So
it's so I'm fighting the urge right now to respond to this. And Jemar, it was such a passionate book. It really spoke to me and opened my eyes. Important, necessary. But here's the thing. I've listened to you talk to people on interviews before where that language has come out. You know what I mean? And so like the tension being that this movie really explores a couple things. One is like, why, like the question, the nuanced question of why do Black authors and content creators play into this and still support? Because even with his girlfriend, like she's like, oh, I liked it, I thought it was fine, you know, without really analyzing it and everything else. There's that. But the conversation we want to lean into is a big part of the movie, which is the way in which white people, and kind of specifically white progressives and white liberals, if not, you know, aggressively so, really play into being this cash cow market for this exact type of content.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that a little bit, shall we?
So first of all, I think there are parallels in the real world. There are books like this, both fiction and nonfiction, that shoot to the top of bestseller lists, that get made into movies, and actually, you know, many of them are quality work.
Big tension watching the movie. I was like, are they commenting on Angie Thomas? Because as a Mississippian, I don't know how I feel about that.
I heard you say that, and I was like, ooh, I don't want to think about that right now. I just want to be in the movie because, Angie Thomas is a Black woman author, wrote The Hate U Give, which was made into a movie, and Mississippian, where we've both lived. So there's quality work out there like that. But in this movie, what was sticking out was there's a white liberal audience for this that really wants it. And that's what it was kind of poking fun at, critiquing, if you will. And so just some specific examples. There was a line in there that I think was it Issa Rae's character who said,
could have been,
they white people don't want truth, they want absolution.
Absolution. Yeah.
That was heavy. I'm not even completely sure what that means, but
they think they want truth, but what they really want is absolution. It was something like that.
Yeah, tell us from your perspective.
No. I mean, I'm
the insider's perspective on truth versus absolution.
That's great. Thank you for that. No. I think there's a lot of truth in that line, and it's absolutely true. You know, I was thinking about, you know, in an episode that you and Ryan recently recorded, you were talking specifically about especially white conservatives and the ways in which like relationship building is important. Like, you know, to a lot of folks that, you know, you might walk into your church, see a dude in a red hat, and building up those relationships based on like a common interest as opposed to going right for something that's triggering is going to do you a lot better to actually building those, like to some extent, the relationship building is more important than changing hearts and minds, because you can't change hearts and minds if there is no relationship there. Right. And so I think that for a lot of white progressive liberals, especially in kind of more of an affluent type way, they've got a very bubbled mentality. They don't think they've got a bubbled mentality because a lot of times these people are coming out of more conservative bubbles.
That's true.
And so there has been kind of this, you know, enlightenment, whatever it may have been, or whatever you want to label it, in which they now are aware. And sometimes it is something like a book or a Color of Compromise or whatever it is that is kind of a, you know, that light bulb moment that goes off. And so it is like for them very important. It is very, you know, impactful. And there is kind of almost like a sacredness around this.
Yes.
But now they've found themselves with, okay, I don't know what to do with this. Right? Like, I know that something's wrong. I know that I've been part of the problem. And the first thing I want to do is no longer be part of the problem or associated with the problem or seen as the problem. And that's generally, I mean, that's the natural response. It's the wrong response, but it's the natural response, right?
What do you mean? Because I was going to say it's maybe right, but the volume's turned up too high. Maybe it's overzealous.
Sure. I think the absolution and the desire to, I'm not racist.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's like, no. Actually, what if instead of doing that, you acknowledge, hey, I am racist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. It's the actual, the path out of racism is not a way, but to lean in to some extent.
That reminds me of a story. There was an administrator at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, no bastion of liberalism.
Right.
But I think he was the provost, and he said, I am a white racist. Now, what was interesting is he was a historian, and I often find that people who
historians are always
history right recognize this, but he got lambasted for saying I am a white racist, as he got lambasted for falling into what they said was this trap of indoctrination, wokeism, whatever, but he was also one of the people who I think was far more approachable, far more broad-minded around race than other Southern Baptists that he was around, precisely because he didn't go the route that you were saying is wrong, of trying to absolve yourself and saying, I'm not racist. Rather, admitting, like, look, this is the atmosphere I was raised in.
Well, that's the thing, because you have to analyze not just the atmosphere of where this comes from, because there is a grace in recognizing the programming, so to speak, right? Like, and recognizing like, okay, of course this is what I thought, this is all I knew, and of course, like, this was not even being taught to me maliciously. We've got a multi-generational system at work here, right? And so, like, by leaning in and kind of analyzing yourself, you're able to start recognizing not all, but some of your blind spots. And if you don't do that, then you're running away with all of your blind spots.
I just think that's a really good distinction, because, okay, so my white liberal racism story is connected to grad school.
All right, let's go.
And it's not one single incident. It was more of the culture that was there. So I went to the University of Mississippi, which for most people, it's going to say, oh, obviously that's conservative. It's in Mississippi. Reality is the poli-sci department and the business department, those were quite conservative.
I did do an episode of Red Flag called Ole Miss, the Disneyland of the Confederacy. But our representative, if I'm remembering correctly, was actually a history professor from the university itself.
Okay.
So there you go.
Well, see, exactly. So by department, it can be very different. So I was in the history department full of white progressives and liberals. And when I say full of, I mean, I was the only Black PhD candidate in my cohort.
Okay.
So there were master's candidates. There were PhD candidates coming up after me, but I was the only one in my cohort, to my recollection. So I was always the only Black person in class. And these are small discussion-oriented classes. And so you would really get to know what people thought about stuff. Because we literally, every class was a 3-hour conversation, which sometimes bang your head on a table. I don't want to talk to anybody for that long, but that's grad school for you. What came out was I started to see these white liberals knew a lot about Black people, but didn't know Black people.
Right.
And that, to me, is a fundamental issue with white liberals' approach to race.
Right.
They see all of the problems structurally, institutionally. They read all the books. They say all the right things. But when it comes to actual embodied relationships with people who are different, it's just as white and in a bubble as their more conservative counterparts, if not more so, because if you bring in denominations like the SBC as a whole are more diverse than some white mainline denominations, right? So I find that to be a real issue, because when you speak simply in the abstract about a people or people group, and you don't have actual meaningful experience with them, it still comes off as pretty tone deaf, if not outright racist. Hey folks, Dr. Jemar Tisby here. I'm one of your co-hosts on the Pass the Mic podcast along with Tyler Burns. We've been doing this thing for 10 years now. This year's been an especially tough year, if I'm honest, but we do this because of you. And the only reason we can keep doing this is also because of you. So I'm encouraging you to visit patreon.com/passthemic and become a supporter of this show. For as little as $1 an episode, you can keep us going. Visit patreon.com/passthemic. Hey folks, Dr. Jemar Tisby here, and I want to make sure that you know about the Justice Takes Sides brand. This is merchandise, this is apparel to help you represent your values. This is about getting people off the sidelines and into the struggle for justice that's ongoing today. Go visit justicetakesides.com, get your merchandise and apparel there, and follow us on Instagram at Justice Takes Sides. Welcome back. We were just talking about white liberal racism. And Beau, you had some stories of this. You've encountered some of this.
And Beau, you're a white liberal racist. Why don't you
give us your perspective as a white liberal?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I think kind of the mindset of when you run away, when you kind of have this aha moment, and the desire is to, like, how do I get perceived as not racist as soon as humanly possible? Because I'm not racist. I don't see myself as racist. I'm aware of the racist now. So how do I get away from that? Without those relationships, what do? Well, you first run to people that agree with you, who also have kind of shared that experience, which are generally speaking more often than not mostly white. Maybe not all. Maybe there's that one token friend. God bless them. But like the reality is,
and you really leverage that one person.
Oh,
like, yeah. My friendship group is diverse.
Right. Do you feel that squeeze? Have you felt that squeeze before?
A little bit.
And so, like, there is kind of a new bubbling. And I think it's interesting because we kind of run to what we knew before, even while we're trying not, like, it's like the pendulum swing from one kind of dogmatic view to another, right? And so, that occurs. But then more often than not, too, it's like trying to find areas of discrimination that you feel more comfortable getting into.
Interesting.
So this is, there's going to be a layered nature to this, right? So a large part of what I saw, especially back in my tech industry days, right, is when people would talk about diversity, and that would be the word. The blanket word was diversity. But generally speaking, what they would actually break it down to is talk about all of the gay folks that were on staff or all of the non-binary folks that are on staff, which were largely white people, like broadly white people. And so they talk about they're vastly diverse, but then it would look very similar.
You walk in, you can't tell.
And again, I'm not saying that that's not important, right? You understand what I'm saying? But what I am saying is that it's not addressing this particular issue. You're not actually addressing the racism that's here. I remember there was one time in particular, a very frustrating experience I had when I was in South by a couple years ago. A guy came up, walked up to the podium.
South by Southwest.
South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. Thank you. Yeah, my bad. They had all these Silicon Valley guys. This one dude that was leading the panel was wearing like a pink bathrobe with these like giant glasses. I mean, it was the entire theme, by the way, of this entire conference was to dismantle the fraternity culture in Silicon Valley.
Wow.
And I remember like the events at night were like beer pong. I was like, does nobody see what's going on here, right? This guy comes up, black dude, says, hey, his question is about opportunities for Southern companies, like Southern startups who are having a hard time getting the funding and don't have access to that. It's a great question.
Great question.
I was very interested in this as well. That's when the dude immediately started talking about the disparities for black folks in America broadly. And I'm like, he didn't even actually ask you that, man. Like, it was so infuriating when it was all said and done. And like, I really wanted to get up there and ask like, hey, could you actually answer his question?
That could have been a scene from American Fiction.
And I tell you what, yeah. Anyway, they shut it down before I could. But anyway, it was wild. And it just kind of exposes this complete lack of blind spot, or these complete blind spots that exist there. Well, and it's because you don't do the work because you're so anxious to be disconnected from racism that you end up like embodying it and bringing it along with you.
And you miss so much nuance in not just the conversation, but living out an anti-racist life, if you will, however you want to term it. And here's how it shows up. I used to have a coworker, a black woman sociologist, who's one of the smartest people I've ever met. And she used to jokingly talk about these white people who, in her terms, were woker than woke.
Okay.
And I've never forgotten that term, woker than woke. Because, as you're saying, in this rush to make sure people know I'm not a racist, TM, they rush past even black people.
Right.
And what we're asking for and the way we're talking and how we're thinking about race, there's folks can get so eager to show what they're not. They go overboard.
Right.
They just go overboard and they're overly sensitive about stuff even black folks don't get upset about. So there was that scene in the beginning of American Fiction. Jeffrey C. Wright's character is teaching a literature class, and he's got the N-word on the board as part of a quote from Flannery O'Connor.
Okay.
And he's fine with it. He's talking about the quote. He's talking about the literature, and a young white woman college student is like, I'm offended by that.
And they gave her blue hair. I mean, they knew what they were doing.
They really leaned into the liberal part. Yeah. And she gets so, Jeffrey C. Wright's like, I'm black and I'm okay with it. So I think you can be fine with it too.
Storms out with tears in her eyes.
She storms out with tears. Mm-hmm. Oh, goodness gracious. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's an example, right? Of being so like hyper conscious about it that you actually it becomes performative.
Right.
And that is, to me, a clear hallmark of you actually don't really know black people.
Mm-hmm.
You know about us, you know about our history, about our story, but you don't actually know us, because when you do, and by us I mean plural. So one thing sociologists say is that personal relationships are important, especially for white people, to change their minds about race, but not just your one black friend.
So let's talk about the one black friend, right? Because like this is a thing. This is both a progressive and conservative thing. Is everybody's got the one black friend, right? All these white folks have
so
the
to
one
speak.
Yeah, right. And whoever that person is that most either aligns with their viewpoints, typically is the kind of the conservative approach, or you found one black person. We agree on this.
Becomes your oracle.
Exactly. Yep. And then kind of you become the magic black friend from that standpoint.
Yep.
But it's a complete lack of community and a lack of diversity, a lack of, understanding that no one's a monolith. You know what I mean? That you have to actually be in a legitimate community in order to understand a community.
And here's the way it works with conservatives, because they'll find the one conservative black person.
And they will apply them like Pokemon.
Yes, exactly.
Like, no, dude, man.
I always jokingly say when I give talks and somebody brings up the one black friend thing, or I'm talking about the one black friend thing, I'm just like, does your one black friend know they're your one black friend? Because there's many cases in which the relationship is so superficial, is so passing that they don't
do they know they're the one? Do they even know they're your friend?
Exactly.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
do you have each other's phone numbers? Right. You know, do you know the names of each other's partners or children, if applicable, right? Like, beyond I interact with this person occasionally at work or whatever it might be, are they actually your friend? Because we can easily, in the midst of a conversation to prove I'm not racist, trot out the one black friend when really it's a colleague, an acquaintance, maybe.
Well, here's another litmus test. Can you actually be honest with this person? Is there an actual honest conversation? Can you disagree with this person?
Yes.
Can you be upset with this person? And like, you know what I mean? Like, is there an actual relationship? I had a friend of mine who once said that he could never truly be a long-term friend with somebody he's never had an argument with, because like it's never been tested and refined. Like he has to have been with somebody to be really ticked off by them, and then to stick through it to know that that's a real friendship. I think there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah, for sure. Iron sharpening iron and all that. Conflict and persevering through it tests the strength of a relationship for sure. I think structurally, here's how I think about it. So in my second book, How to Fight Racism, I talk about the arc of racial justice, awareness, relationships, commitment. I always say that for conservatives, the issue is the commitment aspect, which is not simply staying the course. It's committing to changing systems, structures, institutions that are biased against certain people and grant privileges to others who are deemed white. So it's seeing the structural part is hard for them. I always say for liberals, the R is the hard part. Relationships. Because they'll see the structural and the systemic issues with racism, but they won't have real relationships with black people. And by the way, some won't have real relationships with conservatives, even though they're in their network.
It's interesting how it makes them totally ineffective to be able to be helpful, because there is that lack of relational knowledge, and they won't reconnect with the people that really need to have those relationships.
Which is why we have to have all these conversations about white people talking to white people.
And I should go ahead and say, I mean, this is game recognizing game. I mean, if it's not very clear, I fit the white liberal standpoint and the racist man. I'm just kidding.
Well, I think here's a fundamental difference that demonstrates everything we're talking about. We've been friends for over 10 years.
That's true.
And I would say friends because we get into it.
Really, we're friends?
Yeah. Here's the official certificate is in the mail. But yeah, like
I knew I'd have one black friend eventually. I'm so glad this happened. I got it on mic.
Get your T-shirt,
and it's
at
a
the
famous
door.
one too.
But I know I'm not the only one.
Right.
Whether it's Tyler or Kembany or Christina or, go on down the list, you actually have a network.
You don't know all my black friends.
I don't know all your black friends. I can't name them, listener. They're numerous. And that's the point. You want to get to the point where you couldn't possibly name,
You know what's interesting? This is kind of on that. There was back in the day, I used to spend a lot of time at the cigar shop. And there was a gentleman, former war vet, black gentleman, former war vet, who would go there a lot. And more often than not, he would like this. Now the shop is very diverse. Back then it was less racially diverse. And so he would go specifically because he wanted to be around white people and build relationships from that standpoint. That was his whole thing. And I remember him and I got in a discussion. We disagreed on something. I can't remember what it was. But then he in a weird challenge to me, he was like, "How many black people do you know?" And it had nothing necessarily to do with what we were talking about. But the funny thing was I was like, I actually don't know the answer to that question. It was how many black friends do you have? And I was like, I've never done an inventory.
Let me go back and check the stock. Hey, Mike, are these numbers up to date?
Right.
Is the spreadsheet on point?
He was trying to put, like say that he knew, like he could speak for white people broadly because of the relationships he had.
Because he had so many white friends.
But the reality is, like, well, I wouldn't try to speak for black people broadly. You know what I mean?
And you would have learned that, you know, I mean, first of all, principially, but also...
I'm sorry, hang on now, doctor. What was that word?
In principle.
Okay.
You would know that, right? But also hanging around black people often enough in different settings, right? That's another one too. It's not just work. It's not just casual. It's all kinds of settings, and through all times of emotions, right?
So you got to, but so this, I think it's so funny because I've thought about this before, but I do feel like there is kind of almost like a 101 to making black friends that white progressives sometimes need early on.
Tell us.
And well, I mean, like it seems simple, but I mean, the reality is start with common interests. The same way you would make friends with a black person is actually the same way you would make friends with any person.
Wow.
You have to
black people are people.
Right. you have to like find areas of common interest.
Drop.
And you have to find areas where there's not power dynamics
that's good
so specifically at play. It's not necessarily going for, helping build houses in the black neighborhood or something like that, where you are literally in a white savior role. It's not specifically in prison ministry. By the way, these are not bad things. These are good things. But that's not where you really develop the actual like legitimate relationships where you're on kind of an even playing field, so to speak.
That's right.
And I think that gets missed out a lot because a lot of times white liberals, even though they're aware of the structure there, I think something about the structure there they're still kind of comfortable with in terms of that power structure. And it hasn't really been fully analyzed. This is why I say you have to start with actually analyzing the racism within yourself in order to be able to process forward.
That's really helpful.
I think so.
Yeah.
But there has to be like whatever your thing is, whatever you're interested in. I guarantee there are black people that are interested in that thing that you're interested in.
Like with your example at South by Southwest, if you wanted to make another black friend, you could have connected with the guy who asked the question over tech in the South.
Absolutely. I was good. My quota was filled. But yeah, absolutely. But no, I mean, like whatever it may be, video game. I mean, obviously, I'm a geek, so I'm not without a lack of interest.
Live into it, yeah.
But the other factor
too is there's a whole blurred culture.
There's a massive blurred culture. But this is the thing. Like, I am ridiculously like not a good example from the standpoint of I lived in Jackson, Mississippi. Jackson is one of the blackest cities in America.
80% black. Now, second highest percentage of any city over 100,000.
Now, I was brought up in a very kind of self-contained white infrastructure in Mississippi because of school segregation and everything that predated my birth from that standpoint. But like in terms of once I was an adult, moved back to Jackson, all I had to do was go to stuff. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But I realized if you're in like Iowa, you know what I mean? Like that's going to be different. Yeah.
It's a challenge. It is. And this is what I always say to white folks is you have to go out of your way to be in a context with racial diversity because our society has deliberately been engineered for white people to stay separate. So you're going to have to reverse that. You're going to have to go against it.
So I've got a question for you now, because I'm curious in those types of settings where you are kind of one of the few that's there. Are there like a lot of thirsty white friends that like kind of gather to you? Like, how would you provide some guidance from that standpoint? Because I have no context.
In How to Fight Racism, I talk about a little bit about this. One, to your point, how to make friends of a different race or ethnicity. Part of it, I mean, we really overcomplicate it, right? So part of it's shared interests. Part of it's just asking. And I give in the book examples of two of my closest white guy friends literally asked me out on like friendship dates. Like one dude straight up came up to me after class, after one of our classes in seminaries, like, "Hey man, you drink beer?" I was like, what? First of all, it was a deep Alabama accent. That's how he spoke. And I'm just like, what is this dude about? And he's just like, no, man, I just want to hang out and get to know you. And so that started a beautiful friendship. Yeah. And it literally was that simple. But the other thing I say is humility, not utility.
Oh, yes, Jay. Yes.
So humility, not utility. So a lot of, when you talk about, like white people kind of swarming you if you're the only black person in their midst. One of the questions I asked is, would you be friends with this person if you never even talked about race? If they weren't your guru, if they weren't your oracle, if they weren't the one black friend you cite, do you have those shared interests? And do you have the humility to, like you say, interrogate your own racism to say, even in this relationship, am I using them as my legitimacy to say I'm not racist, right? And that's a tough question to answer, but I think even in asking that question, you gain a little bit of humility that can lead to more authenticity in those friendships.
Or to be your racial Google search or your racial pulse check type deal. Yeah.
And by the way, Black folks are different. So I myself, I don't mind that.
Right.
Because this is what I do.
No, so the cigar shop is the same. That's what he wanted to do.
Absolutely. So sometimes Black folks will bring it up, and sometimes you can ask us question after question. We'll never get tired of it. But Black folks are different. So there might be other folks who deal with that at work all day. And when they're hanging out and socializing, that is not what they want to talk about. And it's just people knowing people and knowing if it's truly a friend, what they're about, where their boundaries are. And, sure, occasionally you can get into that, I think, with most Black folks, but it's a really good reality check on yourself to say, is every conversation I have with them about race?
Yeah.
Am I always trying to learn something about race from them?
Yeah.
That could be a problem.
That's guilty of like across the aisles. I mean, that's something that, again, growing up in kind of more of an area in which there was a lot of white affluence in the middle of a predominantly Black city. I've noticed this trend as I've gone to funerals in particular, where like a lot of folks later in life will make one Black friend to have those conversations with, so that, and it feels like so that when they die, that one Black friend that nobody knows at this very white funeral goes up like on the podium and says, he wasn't racist. Like, I feel like that scene's played out a couple of times at some funerals I've been at.
You think that's a Southern thing?
It might be everywhere? A Southern thing.
I don't know. That's interesting. But I know exactly the dynamic you're talking about. Well, that's the utility of your quote unquote one Black friend, is they are validation.
You got to get that Black card in order for St. Peter to let you through the pearly gates. Wait, I'm sorry, you're from Mississippi?
Or at least the not racist card. Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully Black folks, we feel like we can put up appropriate boundaries. If we want to talk about race, if we want to reveal the trauma from our stories of racism, we can, but we can also not. And that's okay too. And we should have friendships and relationships where that's okay.
Yeah. And I'll just say this too, for white liberals that don't want to become a caricature. And if you are, and by the way, if you are a caricature or you find yourself caricatured, like recognize this is a good come to Jesus moment. You know what I mean?
Preach the good news. Share the gospel.
Right. Like this is not a bad thing that you're being called out. It's good to be called out. Even better if it's actually your friends that are calling you out. That's a big friendship moment in and of that, because they could have just stopped being friends with you or rolled their eyes with you. You know what I mean? That's a special thing. Don't let it trigger you to the point of giving up. Just stop, pause, listen, and evaluate. If you yourself feel triggered by something, maybe just don't say anything. Maybe just kind of think about it from a different perspective. Try to decenter yourself. It's a good tool, not just in terms of building friendships with Black people, but just it's a good tool in general to be a human being, is to decenter yourself as you're talking to somebody. And if they upset you, what is it? Ryan was saying about make sure you're taking the gracious path, the most gracious path.
Mm-hmm.
That's
assume good intentions.
Radical grace and radical charity. It'll go a long way.
Well, it's good to be friends with you, Beau.
Oh man, it's good to be friends with you too. And I've got it on mic. That's one.